Well, Joe Rogan has decided to keep me very busy. He had on last week Wesley Huff, which we talked about, and then he had on right after that virtually Mel Gibson. Let me just say I like Mel Gibson a lot. I think he's super cool. He has like a really he has like a cool dad vibe kind of going on, and I really like him as a person. He's a very interesting person, a very skilled director. Passion of the Christ was great. I haven't seen a single Mel Gibson movie that I don't like, so I absolutely love the work he does. I think as a person, he's really cool, and I just want to start off there. And I think he's right about a lot of things that he says that are controversial. But there are some things that he says, especially in this Joe Rogan interview, that are simply factually incorrect. And he uses these things to disparage the Catholic Church and to call into question the papacy of Pope Francis and some of the preceding popes, which is just untrue and is dangerous, actually. It can lead people to leave the Catholic Church. That's not a good thing to do. Of course, we believe outside the Catholic Church, there can be no salvation. In fact, it's kind of ironic that the so-called trads comfortably ignore the fact that a pope, Pope Boniface the Eighth, I believe, yeah, Pope Boniface the Eighth in 1302 said that you need to be in communion with the Bishop of Rome, with the Pope, if you're going to be saved. And if you're going to be a traditionalist, you're probably going to want to hold to what a pope in the 1300s said. Just saying. Just saying. But anyways, we're going to get into all of that and much more, including some thoughts about my Wesley Huff video that I posted last week. It caused a lot of controversy in the comments. So I want to kind of touch on that at the end of this video. I want to focus on Mel Gibson's interview first. So stick around for all of that and hit the like button or hit the dislike button. Drop your hate comments. Just do it all. It's fine. I'm just kidding. No, this isn't going to be, we're not going to get angry here. There's no anger. We're all friends. Okay. Anyways, if you want to look further into some of the refutations going around on the internet of what Mel Gibson said in this interview, I'm going to leave a bunch of links in the description because there are tons of people that are debunking different parts of this interview and they do a really good job. And in some cases, they're probably going to do a much better job than I can do in this video. So go check those out for a more thorough debunking of this entire thing. I'm not the end all be all of debunking, Mel Gibson. I'm just one voice in this collection of voices of Catholics on the internet trying to debunk this stuff. And it is important because people are being led away from the church by this, and that is not okay. In fact, I've seen posts like this one where somebody literally is saying, I might walk away from the Catholic faith because of all this stuff going around about the Pope. And the thing is, these things going around about the Pope are just not true, which is the saddest part. It's like you're causing somebody to leave the faith over something that is not even true. So in this case, this person says, as a Catholic, I'm having a hard time with this guy, meaning the Pope. I could use a prayer here, Father, because I'm close to walking away. And then we have Pope Respecter, which is a amazing X account. I highly recommend going and following Pope Respecter right now. Right now. Pause this video, go to Pope Respecter. I'm going to leave a link in the description to Pope Respecter. I'm shouting everybody out today, by the way. I just love the work that people are doing and countering all of these lies. Go to Pope Respecter, follow the account. The guy's doing great work. So he's referring to, he says, check out this comment under Calvin Robinson's lying post. This is the damage that comes from spreading fake news about the Pope. Community notes are also doing a lot of great work in countering these lies. So we have this community note. So the original story that was claimed here is that the Vatican approves a document which allows homosexual men to become priests in Italy. And the community note clarifies the Italian Bishops' Conference have denied this misinterpretation. I can't talk. The Italian Bishops' Conference have denied this misinterpretation by media outlets. The new document continues to reaffirm the exact opposite of what is purported by the article. They have denied that the norms allow the admission of gay men who are celibate to seminaries. So there's your community note. There's Pope Respecter doing great work out there. Thank you very much. So that's why I find it necessary to make videos like this, because people's souls are literally being lost because of lies about the Pope. So stop lying about the Pope. If you're going to say something about the Pope, make sure it's true. Let's get into that right now before I rant any further.
When they appoint some cardinal in some diocese and he's been covering up for like people who are child molesters,
Yes.
or, like Theodore McCarrick or Cardinal Wuerl or those kind of guys. I mean,
Or the Pope.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm not
Benedict.
not Benny. Well, he was covering up, but
Yeah.
so is the guy now.
Is he really?
Well, yeah.
So this is just not true. Now, this is a whole big and convoluted subject. I made a video a while back that I'm going to link to. It's going to pop up in the corner right now that you can click on. And I totally debunk the idea that, child abuse is rampant in the Catholic Church and it's not a safe place for children. That's just not true. The Catholic Church is the most transparent religious organization when it comes to this issue, by the way, because of reforms like those by Pope Benedict the 16th, and because of the ongoing efforts of Pope Francis, who has a zero tolerance policy for this kind of thing. So these lies are just disgusting. They're not true. Most of the allegations, in fact, virtually all of the allegations against the Catholic Church or clergy in the Catholic Church of harming children come from the middle to late 20th century, so like 70s, 80s, maybe some in the 90s. As of 2001, the rate of this happening dropped from like before it might have been 400 accusations per year. After 2001, early 2000s, it dropped to maybe a dozen allegations per year. So there was a dramatic shift, which was right after Pope Benedict implemented some reforms. There was a dramatic shift from hundreds of allegations per year to maybe a dozen or two allegations per year. And the U.S. Conference of Bishops, they put together a report every year that they publish for the public to see, so everybody can see how many allegations have been levied against clergy for that year. And for the last few years, it's been one allegation per year. So the church has gone from hundreds of allegations per year to one allegation per year in the US, at least. So the church is definitely doing a lot to combat this. There's a zero tolerance policy, like I said, with Pope Francis. And we can just talk briefly about some of the reforms that Pope Benedict and Pope Francis have implemented. So in 2001, Pope Benedict implemented reforms to make it easier, much easier, to defrock abusive priests. Whereas before, there might have been a process that might have taken a long time. Maybe the priest would, spend several years remaining in his position before being removed. Pope Benedict XVI said, no, we're gonna make it much easier to defrock priests that do this. Pope Benedict XVI also publicly apologizing to all of the victims of clergy who did this, and not sweeping it under the rug, but publicly saying, this happened, this should not have happened. I apologize that this happened on behalf of the entire church, and here's what we're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen anymore. Now, Pope Francis, carrying on those reforms, has said publicly that he is committed to a zero tolerance policy on this. He held a summit in 2019 on child protection. He further made reforms in 2019 to make things more transparent so that these things are not hidden behind closed doors. And he also implemented laws that require bishops to make these allegations known to local authorities. Pope Francis has met with some of the victims of abuse by clergy and apologized to them on behalf of the church. He established an entire pontifical commission on the protection of minors. So the idea that Pope Francis is covering up for this, or that Pope Benedict was covering up for this, is just not true. Pope Benedict basically began the reforms that led to the success that the church has had against this issue now. I mean, like I said, around when Pope Benedict first implemented some of these reforms was when we saw this rate of this drop dramatically. So it's not as though he was just trying to hide it and cover it up. Same thing with Pope Francis. He's furthering those efforts. And that's why this has really become not a common thing in the church now. Like I said, in the US, there's one allegation per year. Think about how many Catholics there are in the US. And think about how many priests and bishops there are in the US. Think about how many Catholic schools there are in the US. To have one allegation per year among all of those, they're doing something right. Now, if we can get that to zero, let's do that. But to have a 99% drop in cases means that we're moving very quickly in the right direction, which I'm grateful for.
Well, the institution, it was instituted by Christ, but that doesn't mean that it can't be flawed. And there's a school of thought that says it isn't what it purports to be anymore. It's moved away from what it was intended to be and what it is.
So let's see Mel Gibson's evidence that this church is no longer the church that it claims to be. Let's see what he brings up as evidence of that.
Actually, I don't adhere to a post-conciliar church. I adhere.
Can you define what that means?
Okay. There was an event that happened in the 60s. First, there was an event in the Vatican where they elected John the 23rd Pope, right, in 1958. I was 2 years old, right? He was elected, and it was a very funny thing that happened in the conclave. You know, usually there's white and black smoke that goes out of the chimneys to tell you, we have a pope, you know, habemus papam, you know. And the white smoke came out. And everybody cheered, and they went crazy. And then about a half an hour later, black smoke came out. That never in history has that happened, that the white smoke came out, and then the black smoke came out.
Okay, so white smoke means we have elected a new pope. Black smoke means we have not elected a new pope yet. What he's talking about was an occurrence in 1958 where it wasn't 30 minutes apart, first of all, so that's just not true. What happened was they started burning the thing to make the black smoke. Initially, there was thin white smoke that made it appear like there was white smoke, like a pope had been elected. But like a minute or two later, thick black smoke came out. Now, the smoke appeared to be white, but it could have just been very thin smoke, and maybe it just looked white from the distance. I'm not really sure, but it wasn't 30 minutes apart. So the accusation that Mel Gibson is going with here is they actually did elect a new pope, but then 30 minutes later, something had happened in the intervening time where they were like, we don't want this pope, so we're going to actually say that we don't have a new pope because we don't want this pope. Don't Now, if that were the case and somebody had the power to overthrow that, don't you think they'd be able to do that before the smoke went out? I'm not sure why that would take 30 minutes if somebody had the authority or somebody had the power somehow to overturn the entire election. Maybe they would do that before the smoke went out, I would think. And by the way, this isn't the only time that this has happened. This also happened in the election of 1978, in the 1978 conclave. There was like a grayish smoke that led to confusion. Now, this process was refined in 2005 to make the colors more distinct so we don't have this confusion. But the fact that it's happened more than once, it just says it's not really like there was a conspiracy this one time. It's more so maybe it was just very difficult to predictably and reliably make the same color smoke every time. But also, just to reiterate, the original story that Mel Gibson tells here about the 30 minutes in between, so the way he says it makes it sound like there was a thick cloud of white smoke, and then there was 30 minutes that went by, everybody celebrating, and then 30 minutes later, there's a thick cloud of black smoke. Really what happened was there was a thin kind of white smoke coming up, and a couple minutes or a minute or two later, a thick black smoke came out. So people were a little bit confused at first, and then it turned out it's actually a black smoke. So not the story that Mel Gibson is making it out to be here.
So what was the scenario?
That somebody was elected and that maybe something else happened and he was pushed aside and someone else was put in. So it was
Power struggle.
some kind of power struggle. And, of course, the man who came out was a man called Angelo Roncalli, and he was John the 23rd. Now, it's interesting to note that never had a pope taken the name of another pope ever before in history. But this man took the name.
This is not true, by the way. We're going to get into more of how that is not true as we get into his claims coming up.
Of a known anti-pope from the 15th century that Cosimo de' Medici put in there as his own man. I'll get you in the chair, and then everything will be rosy. You know, everything will go good for business, you know, whatever he was putting him in there for, some corrupt reason. So he took the name of a known anti-pope from the 5th century who actually said, yes, I'm an anti-pope. Sorry, I'm not the right guy, because there was more than one, and he confessed to being, and he wanted to, you know, square things with the Almighty, I guess, so he confessed to being an anti-pope. And so he took the same name as that guy, John the 23rd. So it's interesting, don't you think? I mean,
It's interesting, don't you think? So the thing that Mel Gibson is alluding to, or what he's trying to conclude from all of this without saying it explicitly, is that maybe John the 23rd of the 20th century is admitting that he's not the real pope by taking on the name of an anti-pope, John the 23rd of the 15th century. He misspoke and said the 5th century. It's the 15th century, but it's okay. It's in conversation, so things kind of slip like that. That's fine. But let me give you the full story here. So what happened was, during this time, 15th century, there were actually 3 competing claimants to the papacy. There was Gregory the 12th in Rome. There was Benedict the 13th in Abington. and John the 23rd that Mel Gibson just talked about. All three of these men claimed to be the Pope, and there was a council called, there were several years of schism, and actually there was a Pope before John the 23rd who passed away, and John the 23rd was an anti-Pope rather, before John the 23rd. And then John the 23rd was put in his place after that other anti-Pope passed away. So there was a council held to restore, unity in the church, to resolve all of this, and it was determined that the claimant in Rome was the real pope. So Gregory the 12th. It was determined that he would be the real pope, and the other two were anti-popes. So I mentioned earlier that Mel Gibson was wrong when he said that John the 23rd of the 20th century, the real Pope John the 23rd, was the first to take on the name of a previous pope. First of all, he didn't take on the name of a previous pope because the anti-pope of the 15th century, John the 23rd, was not a real pope. So you can't say that he was a previous pope. But there was another person who took on the name Benedict the 13th as when they became pope. So this was in the 1700s, the 18th century, and Pope Benedict the 13th of the 18th century took that name, even though the anti-pope of the 5th century claimed to be Pope Benedict the 13th. Why is this the case? Well, because let's say Pope Benedict the 13th were to take on the name Pope Benedict the 14th, even though, so there was a real Pope Benedict the 12th, there's anti-Pope Benedict the 13th, and then we have real Pope Benedict the 14th. Wouldn't that be like affirming that the anti-Pope was a real Pope? That would be kind of strange. That would be even more strange than just taking that name. So since there was a Pope Benedict the 12th, the next real Pope Benedict would be Pope Benedict the 13th. The anti-Pope doesn't have a claim to the name Pope Benedict the 13th. And in the same way, Pope John the 23rd wasn't taking the name of a previous Pope. He was taking the next valid name if you're going to be Pope John. There were 22 Pope Johns before him. There was an anti-Pope John who was not a real Pope, so he doesn't get to claim that name. So the next Pope, the next real Pope John would be Pope John the 23rd. If he were to take on Pope John the 24th, then he would be claiming that the anti-Pope John the 23rd was the real Pope, which is not true. So that's why he took on that name. He wasn't the first one to do that, as Mel Gibson claims. And it's not some kind of a secret admission that I'm not the real Pope and I'm trying to send a secret signal of that by taking this name of an anti-Pope. No. Hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have questions in the comments about that, and I can clarify further.
Why would he do that?
Well, whenever you have that kind of power, like I'm sure you've been to the Vatican, right?
Yeah.
It's stunning.
Yes, it's huge.
It's so crazy. When you're walking around, you see just the massive amount, just the dollar value in the art that they possess.
Yeah.
It's fucking insane.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe, when you're a 2,000-year-old institution, over that time, you're going to acquire a good amount of art. You're going to create a good amount of art, and that art is going to be worth a lot of money because of the historical context within which it was made, and because of the reverence for the institution that it was made within. That's pretty normal, actually. I mean, it's not normal to have a 2,000-year-old institution. The Catholic Church is the longest standing human-run institution in the world, and it's not even close. But the fact that they have a lot of cool art that costs a lot of money, it kind of makes sense that over that time they would have acquired and created a lot of that. So I don't think that points to some negative thing about the church. It's just like, yeah, it's been around for a long time. This video is brought to you by the Rosary. I don't think it'd be an exaggeration at all to say that praying the Rosary every day has changed my life in ways that I never thought imaginable. Of course, that's not a surprise because the Rosary has been known to change the course of human history, so it makes sense that it would change my life as well. Just for some examples of how it has changed my life, it has made me more patient, it's made me more happy, it's made me have a deeper sense of peace since I started praying it every day, and it's also helped me stop mortal sins that I was struggling with for my entire life. And those just kind of fell away as I continued to pray the Rosary every day. So if you want to pray the Rosary and you don't know where to start, first of all, there's a lot of resources out there you can find, but I do have a playlist that I'm working on right now, which is me praying all 20 mysteries of the Rosary. The first video at least should be up, which is the Sorrowful Mysteries, and the others will be coming out very soon as well. So if you want to go over there and check that out, there's no ads on the videos, so you're not going to be praying and then there's going to be a mid-roll that tries to sell you laundry detergent or something. Go check that out. Why not? Now back to the video.
It's a country. I
Yeah, it's a
guess.
country inside of a small city.
Yeah.
Because Rome's not the biggest city,
No.
and then it's got a country inside the city
Yeah.
with walls around it,
Sure.
and you can't extradite people.
Yeah. Pretty weird.
How convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even
I mean,
Ratzinger.
imagine if you could extradite people. You know how many countries would want to extradite the Bishop of Rome, the head of the Catholic Church, the visible head of the Catholic Church, rather? Obviously, Jesus is the head of the Catholic Church. But imagine if countries could just be like, hey, we want to extradite this bishop or this cardinal. No, why would you allow that? No way.
And when you asked what's the difference between pre-Vatican II, so Vatican II happened, and of course they took the church and they reformed it, and they
Here we go. So now we're going to get into what happened. What does he mean by a post-conciliar church, and what does he mean when he says that there was a difference between a pre-conciliar church and a post-conciliar church? What is the difference between those two? Let's see what Mr. Gibson has to say.
changed things in it, and it didn't necessarily agree with everything that went before it.
Mm.
And up to that point, yeah, you could find it agreed with itself. But all of a sudden, you got something else to the point where now, I mean,
Okay, so Vatican II did not agree with previous councils, is what he's saying. So what is the example he's going to give that Vatican II did not agree with previous councils?
we got a pope that brought a South American idol into the church to worship.
Really?
He did, the Pachamama.
Okay, first of all, that's not true. But let's say that is true. What does it have to do with Vatican II? Now I know Mel Gibson is he's first of all, this is a conversation. I get that. This is a conversation. It's very casual. Mel Gibson isn't giving some like doctoral thesis on this, but he's just jumping from topic to topic, which is something that people do when they don't really have a very well thought out worldview or a very well thought out perspective on something. They say something and then the train of thought kind of ends because they haven't looked into that much more deeply. So, oh yeah, so pre-Vatican II, post-Vatican II is different. I don't really remember how, but Pope Francis did this other thing that was crazy. So let's talk about that. Uh, Pope Francis, even if you believe the totally false Pachamama hoax, has nothing to do with Vatican II. Vatican II didn't say bring in idols into the Vatican, and that's not what happened. Again, I'm going to get into that. So to just explain what the Pachamama hoax is and actually what the real story is, I'm going to refer to, again, Pope Respector over on X. Huge shout out to Pope Respector. He's doing great work. So in response to this whole Mel Gibson interview, Pope Respector reposted, I believe this is an older post, from December 2024, where he lays out the truth around the Pachamama hoax, the so-called Pachamama hoax. So he says, top 5 proofs that the Pachamama scandal was a complete fake. 1, the tribe was from an area that didn't worship Pachamama. She was worshipped in the mountains, not the jungle. That was animistic, not a God-based religion. So to say that this, Amazonian tribe brought in their idol of their god, even that's not accurate because they didn't even worship this thing. 2, the tribe was Catholic. Everyone there was baptized and confirmed. I bet you didn't know that. Interesting. 3, the artist, also a Catholic, is alive and says it was a logo/symbol designed for the Amazonian missions and that it represented life, not a god. Okay. 4, it was part of a collection of symbols of the Amazon, including baskets, canoes, and hats. And I think these were given as a gift to Pope Francis and the Vatican. 5, trads assert Francis said Pachamama, but leave out immediate Vatican clarification. He meant so-called Pachamama because the press had dubbed it that. Honorary mention, the idea that a Catholic group would go to the Vatican and bring idols is bonkers and takes a special level of tinfoil hat paranoia to seriously believe. Fact check, true. So the Pachamama thing did not happen.
He bought the South and he got
I don't know what that is.
it's kind of like a South American god, Pachamama.
Why would he do that?
Good question. But he did.
Did he have an explanation for why he did it?
Yeah, it's kind of a weasel-worded thing of like, oh, all religions are just as good as one another. But, if that's his contention.
He shouldn't.
No, he didn't say that in response to this controversy. In fact, Pope Francis has never said all religions are as good as the other. What he's referring to is actually a separate so-called controversy that arose when Pope Francis was speaking in Singapore and said that all religions are like different languages to speak about God. Not a perfect analogy, of course. No analogy is perfect. That's why it's an analogy. But Pope Francis has never said that all religions are equal in truth or anything like that. In fact, the Catechism says that while all religions have elements of truth, Catholicism has the fullness of truth. And while you can come to know certain things about God through all religions, you can come to know the fullness of God in the Catholic religion through Jesus Christ. And that is the only way you can be saved, is through Jesus Christ. So this idea that Pope Francis actually said this is it's just not true. It's just not true. And what's frustrating is this video now has about 6 million views. It'll probably have about 10 million by the time my video comes out. So many people, millions and millions of people, are going to see this video and think, one, Pope Francis is covering up for people who hurt children. Two, Pope John the 23rd was admitting he was a fake pope by taking that name. Total bonkers. Three, Pope Francis worshipped an idol and allowed people to bring an idol into the Vatican. All three of these things are just not true. That's what's so frustrating, and that's why I make videos like this, because millions and millions of people are going to see the Mel Gibson interview, and maybe a few thousand of those people will come to see my video, and they'll see that they shouldn't leave the faith because what Mel Gibson is saying about the faith is not true. Or if they are considering converting, and after seeing Mel Gibson's interview, they're going to say, I'm definitely not converting now. They can hopefully find my video and say, oh, I guess that stuff wasn't true. Maybe I will convert. That's the hope. God willing, that is what I hope to accomplish with all of my videos, really.
Be the Pope.
No. I mean,
How can you be the Pope if you say all religions are just as good?
Yeah, we all worship, So,
He didn't.
yeah, there's the Pachamama. There you go.
So he brought that in.
Yeah, into the Vatican. Then the hierarchy even worshipped. They had a ceremony around it outside.
What?
So, well, that constitutes apostasy.
No, yeah.
That's an apostasy move, all right?
So first of all, nobody worshipped this carved image in the presence of the Pope, because it's not an object of worship. It's a symbol of life. It's a symbol of creation. So what Mel Gibson is referring to is that there was some kind of a dance or a ceremony carried out by the Amazonians in the presence of Pope Francis and other bishops and cardinals and such. But Pope Francis, first of all, didn't participate in the ceremony. So even if the ceremony was an act of worship, Pope Francis didn't get in there and participate in it. So that is just not true. So he's accusing Pope Francis of apostasy by saying Pope Francis worshipped this idol. Even if this was an idol, and even if the Amazonians worshipped it, Pope Francis didn't do that. He just sat there and prayed while he was watching the ceremony. But the truth is actually much more innocent than even that, because it's not an idol. It's not an object of worship. The Amazonians are Catholics, and they performed some cultural ceremony in front of Pope Francis in which they showed reverence for this, which was a representation of life, and was even called to Pope Francis Our Lady of the Amazon. Now, contrary to what many believe about worship, especially Protestants, worship is not just saying nice things about something or bowing to something. There are many examples of people bowing in the Bible to other people, and it's not considered an act of worship. So that is not worship. Worship is sacrifice. Worship always involves sacrifice. These other elements can be present in that worship as well, but there must be a sacrifice, which is why we have the sacrifice of the Mass, which Mel Gibson should know about since he claims to be a Catholic or claims to have Catholic beliefs. So if somebody had offered like a Eucharist to this statue, that would be a problem. That'd be a serious problem. And I doubt Pope Francis and other bishops there would just sit by while that happened. Or if they offered anything, if they offered, a bread or something to it, that would not be okay. But that's not what happened. What happened is they did a little ceremonial dance, a little cultural dance, and Pope Francis and the bishops just watched. And now maybe you say, well, even to have another cultural dance in the presence of the Vatican and in the presence of the Pope is kind of weird because it's adapting something from another culture into Catholicism, and that feels wrong. Well, the church has always had a policy of allowing cultures to integrate certain things into their worship and into their religious life that are redeemable and are, you might call it baptizable. If they can Christianize it, then they're allowed to keep that in their culture. If they can't, then they have to drop that if they're going to call themselves Catholics. So, for example, There was a letter by Pope Gregory in the year 601. So this is long before Vatican II. Vatican II was in the mid 20th century. Um, 601, long before that. So if Mel Gibson is going to claim to hold to a preconciliar church, he's going to have to hold to this as well. And Pope Gregory in the year 601, he writes a letter in which he details instructions for adapting practices of a Germanic tribe known as the Angel and allowing an altered version of a ceremony that they used to have within their new practice of Christianity. So he says in this letter, quote, "And since they are wont to kill many oxen and sacrifice to demons, they should have also some solemnity of this kind in a changed form, so that on the day of dedication or on the anniversaries of the holy martyrs whose relics are deposited there, they may make for themselves tents of the branches of trees around these temples that have been changed into churches, and celebrate the solemnity with religious feasts. Nor let them any longer sacrifice animals to the devil, but slay animals to the praise of God for their own eating, and return thanks to the giver of all for their fullness, so that while some joys are reserved to them outwardly, they may be able to more easily incline their minds to inward joys." So what is Pope Gregory saying here? He's saying, here's this Germanic tribe that they have this ritual where they sacrifice animals to these gods, quote unquote, which are really just demons if they are real at all, because there is no other God except for the one true God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But to allow them to keep this practice so that they can still enjoy the same culture, we're not trying to just strip everything out of their culture and make them become, Latin Romans or something. So we're going to allow them to have this practice in an altered form. So they're going to no longer sacrifice to demons, but they're going to sacrifice these animals in the praise of God, and so that they can eat them to their own joy. And they're going to do this on feast days of holy martyrs of the church. So look, I'm not familiar with the dance or whatever ceremony the Amazonian tribe was doing, but the reality is those were Catholics, and they were allowed to keep some parts of their culture by the church. And the parts of the culture that they can Christianize, then they will keep those in a Christian form, in an altered form. And those that they can't, they throw them out. Now, some might hear this and just think, well, now the Catholic Church is just willy-nilly accepting elements of paganism into their religion. That is not the case. Like I said, these rituals or these practices have to be Christianized in order to keep them. If they cannot be Christianized, then they get rid of them. And the church has not been shy about rejecting certain practices that are not baptizable, so to speak. So, for example, in the 18th century, Pope Clement XI published an article called Cum Deus Optimus, in which he condemned the Chinese practice of honoring their ancestors because it was very akin to idolatry, and there was no way to really redeem it. So this and other Confucian practices that were being practiced by some Asian Catholics they were condemned, and they said you need to stop practicing those because they are not reconcilable with Christianity. So that's pretty much all they had to say about Catholicism. It wasn't great, and it's not great that Joe Rogan, in basically the span of a week, had two people come on and spread lies about the Catholic Church. He had Wesley Huff on, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and then Mel Gibson on, and they both just trashed the Catholic Church with falsehoods. At least if you're going to trash the Catholic Church, at least do it with truth. Say something true about the Catholic Church that you don't like, and we can talk about that. But if you're going to just say things that are not true about the Catholic Church to make it look bad, that's called bearing false witness against your brother, and you shouldn't do that. So in summary, what we have here from Mr. Gibson, again, is popes are hiding child abusers in the church. That is not true. Pope Francis has a zero tolerance policy, and Pope Benedict XVI enacted reforms that marked a turning point in the church and saw a huge decline in these numbers of this happening. So both of them should be credited greatly with reducing these occurrences in the church to an almost zero number. 2, we have a potentially rigged election of a new pope because there was white smoke, and then allegedly 30 minutes later there was black smoke. Didn't happen. There was a little bit of thin smoke that was thought to be white from the distance. It was not white, and within a minute or two, there was thick black smoke that made things very clear. This was something that was not the only time that happened in the 1958 election of Pope John XXIII. It had happened. It's happened again in later on in the 20th century, and therefore the church has changed how they do the smoke because they wanted to make it more reliable. 3, we have Pope John XXIII taking that name, Pope John XXIII, as a secret way to admit that he's not the real pope, because that was the name of an anti-pope back in the day. Clearly not true. There was an anti-pope named Pope who took on the name Pope John the 23rd, but he was not a real pope, so he doesn't have a claim to that name. Therefore, the last valid Pope John before that anti-pope was Pope John the 22nd. So the next valid Pope John is going to be Pope John the 23rd. If he were to take on Pope John the 24th, then he would be acknowledging the validity of the anti-pope John the 23rd from the 15th century. And also, Pope John the 23rd, the real Pope John the 23rd of the 20th century, is not the first to do that, because there was a Pope Benedict the 13th, a couple hundred years after the fake anti-Pope Benedict the 13th of the 15th century. 4, we have Joe Rogan saying the Catholic Church has a lot of art that's worth a lot of money. Yeah, that tends to happen if you've been around for 2,000 years. That's not really surprising. It's not a sign of some deeper corruption. So I don't know what the point of that is. 5, we have the pre-Vatican Church is different from the post-Vatican II Church. That's not true. If you just read the Vatican II documents, there's nothing in there that changes doctrine. The only thing that they can claim has been changed is the liturgy, and the liturgy is not something that can never change. That's not a dogma. It's not the first time that it's changed. But even so, it was only changed to be done in the local languages where the Mass is proclaimed, where the Mass is offered. All of the things where, people are, where now Masses are not done ad orientem, or there are certain things that are different within Masses now, those are not reflections of Vatican II. Vatican II specifies that the Mass should be done ad orientem. So all of these things where people don't like what the Masses are now in the Novus Ordo, most, if not all of those, are cases where they're not actually holding to Vatican II. They're actually changing from Vatican II. And if they were to hold to Vatican II, it would look very similar to the Latin Mass. It would just be in English or Spanish or whatever your local language is. So that's 5. And 6, the examples that Mel Gibson gives as changes after Vatican II are not actually related to Vatican II at all. For example, saying that Pope Francis worshipped an Amazonian idol called Pachamama, which didn't happen. Even if it did happen, that has nothing to do with Vatican II. There's nothing in Vatican II that says the Pope should worship idols or something. And Pope Francis was not involved in Vatican II at all. 7th, Pope Francis did not worship an idol, an Amazonian idol. The statue in question was actually not a god at all. And the tribe in question did not ever worship a god called Pachamama. The tribe in question was actually a Catholic tribe. All of them were baptized, confirmed Catholics, and they performed some cultural ceremony in which they showed reverence to this statue, which is a representation of life and creation and a representation of God's creative power. But they didn't worship it. Pope Francis didn't participate in the ceremony at all. So he certainly didn't worship it, and he did not apostatize as Mel Gibson claims he did. So those were all the points that I wanted to make. I just want to give a huge shout out to the people that are countering this on the internet, because in response to this interview, I've seen so many people come out against this and clarify things like I've tried to do in this video. So there was Pope Respecter, like I mentioned, I'm going to butcher it, Uncatechized Catholic on Instagram. You should go check her out. She has a great video detailing the Pachamama incident and how that's not at all what Mel Gibson makes it out to be. So I'll leave a link to the reel in which she debunks this whole thing about Pachamama, and she does a great job, and it's very succinct. So I really appreciate the way she did that. So go check that out. Link is in the description. Catholic Answers has done a great job of debunking a lot of these same lies in the past. Michael Lofton of Reason and Theology has done a great job of debunking these lies in the past. So go and check out everybody I just mentioned, and I'm probably going to have more links in the description to people that I'm forgetting right now. And just check those out. If you're somebody who is a Catholic and you're concerned about the Pope and you're concerned about all these things that you're hearing about him, just know that 99% of the time it's just not true. It's almost always a misinterpretation of what he's saying. So that's all I wanted to say about the Mel Gibson thing. Now, on reflecting on my video about Wesley Huff, I do think I came off a little too harsh, because I forgot to mention in that video, I really like Wesley Huff. I think he's a brilliant guy. I think he's very smart, and I appreciate the work he does. And I really appreciate the work he did on Joe Rogan's podcast in dispelling a lot of the myths that Joe Rogan and others believe about Christianity and about Jesus Christ and about the Bible and things like that. So I think he did a great job on the podcast as a whole. It was just those couple of segments where he says things that are not true about Catholic Church history that make the Catholic Church look bad. I really get defensive about that because I believe that the Catholic Church is the fullness of the faith. It has the fullness of the faith. And I would like everybody to become Catholic. But when you're spreading lies about the church, you're preventing that from happening for a not good reason. You know, if you want to present arguments that Catholicism is not true, present those arguments. But if you're just going to spread lies about Catholicism, I think it's just below what Wesley Huff is capable of because he's a brilliant guy, and I know we all have blind spots and things. You know, he's an expert in the original manuscripts and things like that. He's an expert in ancient translations of the Bible, but he's not necessarily an expert in the Middle Ages, in the history of the Middle Ages or anything like that. So it makes sense that he would get something wrong. Like, I'm not saying he can't be wrong about anything and there's no grace to be given, of course. But when things are wrong, I think it's valid and good for people to say that that's wrong and to correct the record, because otherwise people have a skewed view of the Catholic Church that is based on falsehoods. So all that is to say, I never meant any insult to Protestants in that video. I never meant any insult to Wesley Huff himself. I may have been a little more animated, a little more aggravated than usual because you're lying about my family, and I don't take that lightly. And the same is true of this video. Mel Gibson is making horrendous claims about my family, and I'm not going to just not respond to that. That's why I make these videos. So I think I've made my point there. You know, take it or leave it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, I hope you did. Go ahead and leave a like and subscribe. If you know of a Catholic online who was refuting some of Mel Gibson's claims as well that I didn't mention in this video or that I didn't leave in the description, leave them in the comments because I want all of them to get a huge shout out for this. I think the more we defend the Catholic Church from these lies, the more souls are going to be saved and the more souls are going to be prevented from leaving the church and entering into an eternity of hell potentially. Thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for watching, and until I see you next time, God bless.